Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. And I decided to work on this picture of an elephant from a zoo photo that I took back in the summertime. Had some great light, and something I've been experimenting with more lately is digital workflow. So I'm sketching it out in my iPad in Procreate, and I've got a way to transfer that down onto my sketchbook paper, so I'll show that to you coming up soon. But digital sketching like this is a really quick, I won't say it's quick and easy, but it's mess free, I guess. It's easy to kind of build your scene with grays and kind of get darker and deeper, and the advantage to digital is being able to make revisions quickly, erase parts, move part. You can even lasso and move parts if you don't have your proportions correct. So that's the advantage. It's really not necessary. I have people ask me all the time, do I really need to get into digital? No, I mean, for hundreds of years, artists have been doing it without digital tools. It's just speed, I guess. And you really need to feel comfortable with digital. Now here you can see I'm adding a lot of the details. I don't need to do that at this point, but I decided to turn this into a study because I wanted to get more familiar with the sketch and the details of the elephant before I painted it. And that's just always a good step if you have the patience to do it. So going through adding some of the wrinkles and lines and whatnot, just to become familiar. And it helps me become familiar with the anatomy. When I see a part that's not right, I can easily erase it and go back and alter it. I'm going to transfer this to my sketchbook with this Etchr mirror. Now, this is a new product. I'm thinking about doing a review of it, but I haven't had the time yet. It's just sort of a mirror camera Lucy tool. It allows you to take anything that's on a digital device like your iPad or your iPhone and transfer it down onto your sketchbook or your painting paper. So I won't get into it here, and I really did not have a good way to video the process, so you won't see that. But basically your iPad sits like this and reflects into that surface, and it's all driven by an app, and this is the result. So I will put a couple links, so if you want to check out what the Etchr mirror is, you can go look at it and see. But I've traced the basic outline of the refined digital sketch down with watercolor pencil, and this is sort of a yellow-brown watercolor pencil, and now I'm ready to get going on it. I'm using watercolor pencil because I can tone this with water a little bit, and it gives me a nice underpainting that won't show when the painting is done, like pencil might. Sometimes I like doing pencil under the watercolor, and I don't mind it showing, but in this case I didn't want it to, and I thought this would make a really nice underpainting, and it did. I can add in those details, and it's a good guide for painting on top of. It's just a Faber-Castell Albert Dürer watercolor pencil. And whenever I use watercolor pencil, whether it be to pre-sketch a painting or to actually do the painting, I wet everything. I set it in because it sets it in, darkens it, deepens it. Plus I just like being able to add the tone around the lines, kind of give myself a guide. I kind of wished I had gone a little darker with the pencil because it was hard to see once I started getting paint on there, but more or less it served its purpose. And I pretty much have all the pencil toned and set in, and I'm ready to start adding the color. This was a great piece to paint because it was almost all browns, but I thought it was a good challenge because I wanted to mix my own browns, and we'll talk about that coming up in a minute. But browns, just like greens in landscape, they can become monotonous if you don't take careful pains, to keep them lively and keep various colors in them. So I mix my browns both because they're more transparent and luminous, and because I feel like I can make them more interesting that way than using browns from a tube Nothing wrong with browns from a tube, and again, we'll talk about that here in a minute. I'm laying in the lightest tones right now, and I'm going to work from light to dark as per usual with watercolor. I'm using a 1/2-inch flat Princeton Elite, mainly just because I wanted to get some interesting brush strokes in there. Alright, so let's take a quick break and look at how I mix my browns. And that's kind of what I wanted this episode to center around, and that's mixing your own luminous browns. If you've spent any time around my channel, you know I like to do that in certain situations. I'm not a big user of PBR pigments. They're fine. Multitude of artists use them. I even use them in plein air a lot. But when I'm doing a studio pieces, especially when I want to do glazing, I like the transparency and the vibrancy and the luminosity I can get by mixing my own. In this case with this elephant, here's what I'm using. There are lots of recipes, by the way, but in this case I'm using nickel quinacridone gold as sort of the base color. And that's made up of 2 pigments, an orange and a yellow. And it's sort of a really neat ochre gold. Now to modify that to brown, I'm using Cobalt Violet or quinacridone violet, either one. And let me show you what happens. When you mix with Cobalt Violet, you get more umberish tones. Depending on how much violet you put in there, you can end up with a very grayish color, sort of a brownish gray. Some people would call that mud, but actually, if you're wanting some beautiful, luminous, transparent grays, it's pretty nice. And then when you mix quinacridone gold and quinacridone violet, you get more of a red brown. So I can shift between those 2 kind of coolish yellow browns and red browns. And if I really want to make it a reddish brown, I'll mix the nickel quin gold with transparent red iron oxide. Depending on how you bend the mixture, you get just a very bright red brown. And then in the deeper colors, I might use sepia, Payne's gray, or neutral tint to sort of modify them. I don't use a lot of those because those are less transparent, so it's mainly in the deeper values. And you have to be careful with the Payne's gray because of the yellow and nickel quin gold. It might come out green if you use a lot of it. That may be fine, just something to keep in mind. So, you know, this is what I use, and I can just, you know, by bending the mixture back and forth with these different colors, I can just get a big variety of browns. And now I've got them all sort of pooling on my palette in different ways. And I just like that I can keep the browns very lively and variegated as I paint. If you paint a lot with PBR pigments, you'll find that's hard to do unless you consciously make an effort to introduce other colors as you're painting. So if you want to mix some luminous browns, you might try a palette like that and experiment with it and see what you can come up with. Anyway, back to the painting. Well, today I have my granddaughter Haley with me, and she is job shadowing. You can't see her, but she's here. Tell everybody hi, Haley.
Hello.
And she's watching me do the voiceover and the editing for this. So now I'm switching to a smaller brush, still a Princeton Elite, and we're just deepening the values.
When my papa talks about values, he means how light or dark it is.
And this will go layer by layer. You'll see me add a layer of deeper tones, and they'll get more and more detailed as the values deepen. And I'm staying fairly golden brown. I will, like here, adding some rusty reds. Just a fun animal to paint. I mean, lots of cool wrinkles. I had a photo that had really pretty good light. trunk was especially fun to paint. Here I've switched to a silver brush, black velvet detail brush. And we're diving down another value in tone. And you know, wrinkles like are in an elephant trunk or on the face are not just a simple line. They're usually layers of gradually lightening and deepening lines. So you want to watch that. And I'll add some highlights in a bit, probably with gouache. You saw me on the ears bring in some Payne's Gray, just to add a little bit of bluish green tints. Now the background, I thought about doing washy, you know, like I usually like to do, but since I had been using a flat earlier, I wanted to get some interesting brush strokes in the background. So I'm going for these almost abstract shapes that are very well facilitated with a flat brush. And I just wanted some darks on the right side of the elephant and going to the middle, just to sort of make those highlights really pop. And it was fun. It was fun putting in that background. And I added some sepia and some red iron oxide, just to kind of vary the tones with Payne's Gray and some neutral tint. We're starting to get the detail down to where I want it with at least the transparent paint. And here again, you can see I'm using the flat to add some interesting brush strokes. I'm not just throwing in brush strokes for the sake of brush strokes. I'm adding them where values need to be darker. So they serve a purpose, but I like the interest of, as the detail moves away from the face, of adding some interesting brush strokes to the overall painting, and to keep parts of it feeling loose and expressive while still having detail. Deepening more values, and this is what it means when you work light to dark. You start out with the lightest values, build down into your deepest values. Now here I'm using gouache, and I'm just tweaking the highlights, and this is the way I like to use gouache. I like to go as far as I can with watercolor, and I have mixed, although it looks sort of white, it's really a kind of a yellow gold white, and it matches well the browns. And it just is kind of popping up those deep strokes and wrinkles a little bit. Just enough to add a slightly extra dimension.
Now my papa is using gouache, and gouache is another type of watercolor, and it is more opaque.
And you end up, you know, with your very deepest pops of darks. And that's what I'm looking for. There are some painters that will start with those. I never like doing it that way. They'll put in the very darkest tones and then you know where they need to go. And that's fine, but I've never felt that way worked for me. So I build down into them, gradually deepen them. Doing a little more tweaking here with the gouache. We're just about done. And this is the finished piece. I like it as per usual. I will stare at it over the next day or two and see what I might want to do to improve it or tweak it. But I think we're going to stick with this. And it's a pretty fun sketchbook exercise, I think. This, by the way, was a artist field book. I don't even know if you can buy these anymore. I think they stopped making them, but I could be wrong. But this is the field book that's made by Arches. So it's Arches 140-pound cold press. Can't really do any better in a sketchbook than that. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you watching. Thank you, patrons, for your support. Thank you for making this channel possible. Appreciate you so much. We'll see everybody in the next video.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.